So the last new release I reviewed was Crime Boss Roque City, and it was shit. So I told myself the next time I buy a full price game and review it, it's going to be something I actually enjoy. And when I saw Remnant 2 was out, I thought, well, that looks sick, let's give it a go. Now I want to make it clear I haven't played Remnant 1, and only found out Remnant 2 was even a thing the day it came out. And since everyone was saying the sequel is better in every way possible, obviously I bought that one. Also, this isn't going to be a spoiler-free review, so if you haven't played the game and wish to avoid spoilers, then maybe don't watch this. Oh, and if you enjoy the video, please remember to subscribe, it would really help out. Anyway, without further ado, let's find out if this game is really as good as everyone says it is. So, the story is set 20 years after the original Remnant game, where the evil extra-dimensional race known as the Root is still trying to take over the world, and of course it's your job to stop it. Now admittedly that's a very simplified version of the story, since the game is full of lore, as well as NPCs who will dump insane amounts of said lore onto you at a moment's notice, some of which is so long that if you stick it out you actually get rewarded.
War. It's for take this now.
Yeah, it's worth noting that a lot of the interactions in this game, if you want to hear them out fully anyway, go on for a very long time, and depending on how you feel about that kind of thing, can be very tedious to get through. Now, the exceptional voice acting does alleviate this problem a fair bit.
I'm afraid you have stumbled into the wrong door, little mouse.
But even then, some sections can still be a struggle. See, the main story really isn't all that interesting, and I never found myself at all invested in any of the human characters. Now, that's not to say the game as a whole isn't interesting, because it very much is, it's just a lot of the more engaging content comes from the stuff that has basically no connection to the main storyline. For example, a pair of beings who inhabit the same body but in different dimensions, or dealing with a feud between the physical manifestations of life and death.
Here bleeds the lie. Here mules the old order. Kill it. Kill the doll, and we shall seal our pact.
And all of this is enhanced by incredibly well done and diverse world building. You've got Lossum, a clear tribute to FromSoft's Bloodborne, Yeisha, a densely packed jungle, Narud, a barren alien desert, the Labyrinth, a giant stone, labyrinth with constantly shifting environments, and Root Earth, the game's final area. Not only are these places wildly different from each other, resulting in a completely new experience each time, but feature multiple locations to explore, along with locations within those locations. For example, an aliens-inspired lab complete with facehuggers. And you'd think this much content might lead to empty, lifeless maps, but it doesn't. They've managed to cram in as much as possible without it ever feeling cluttered or badly designed. It's also worth mentioning just how good everything looks. Even on my not-so-high-end PC, I was still taken aback at just how detailed some of these environments are. Whether it be densely packed jungles or desolate landscapes, it all looks really, really impressive. So the gameplay in Remnant 2 is fantastic. I bought it almost exclusively because people were calling it Dark Souls with guns, and after playing it, that's a pretty accurate explanation. The actual gameplay loop is pretty similar to your average Souls game, featuring a hub area, in this case Ward 13, where you can buy items or upgrade your weapons. Then it's your job to travel through the various dimensions, loot, kill everything in them, get shafted by the boss for half an hour, and retrieve whatever item is needed to advance further. However, unlike the Souls games, almost everything in Remnant 2 is procedurally generated. This means quests, loot, enemy locations, and even bosses can be completely different depending on the player. Your first area is also entirely random and can take place in either Lossum, Narud or Yeisha, playing perfectly into the game's campaign reroll feature. See, when you reroll a campaign, you'll keep all your weapons, levels, gear and abilities, but have the chance to experience the parts of the game you inevitably missed on your first playthrough. You even get a chance to up the difficulty to compensate for your increased stats and damage. It's very much a game you're meant to play multiple times, as it's designed in a way that ensures you'll only scratch the surface of its content on a single playthrough. Now thankfully the game does offer adventure mode, which allows you to replay a single area without having to re-roll your entire campaign, ideal for when certain areas didn't spawn or you missed out on some loot. Now in terms of actual combat, it's pretty rock solid. You get 3 weapon slots, a primary, a secondary and melee, as well as amulets and rings to increase stats. You also get a roll for evading attacks, which initially I thought was sluggish, but eventually realised it's meant to be like that. See, enemy attacks aren't actually all that quick, and are typically much more delayed than you expect. As such, my Dark Souls muscle memory meant I was dodging way too early and getting hit all the time. However, after I realised this, I had a much better time. It's also worth mentioning that your roll speed is directly affected by your equip load, so the heavier your armour, the slower and less effective your dodge is, with some armour being so heavy you can't roll at all. Now obviously this is going to differ from player to player, but I found the medium armour to be by far the best option, since I've always preferred fast rolls over heavy armour, but like I said, it's personal preference. Now the number of guns at your disposal is impressive to say the least. Everything from pistols, shotguns, rifles, machine guns, light machine guns, as well as all manner of melee options. On top of that, you have the rarer, more powerful weapons which are either crafted after beating a boss or found in hidden areas. All of them feel great to use and you can physically see the difference in power. Additionally, almost all of them can be customised extensively with all manner of modifications, ranging from player-activated abilities to what the game calls mutators. These are permanent passive abilities that enhance your weapons further, and again are just as numerous and varied as normal weapon mods. It's also worth noting that mods will actually change a weapon's appearance and not just their function. Now, to be honest, I didn't stray too far from my comfort zone when it came to weapon choice, since some of them are just insanely good off the bat. The Enigma pistol, for example, is busted, and I have no idea how it ended up as a secondary. It melts entire rooms of enemies in one go, doesn't need to be aimed, doesn't overheat, and has a shocking range for what it is. And that's not even considering upgrades, so obviously I used it the entire time. That said, this is my personal preference and the game does cater to pretty much every playstyle, which brings me to one of the most interesting parts of Remnant 2, the archetype system. Archetypes serve as the game's classes, all of which have different gear, perks and abilities, and initially work the same way as a class in any other game. You select the archetype you want and level it up. However, this is where Remnant 2 begins to differ. As you progress, you'll gain access to a second archetype. These are either bought from NPCs in Ward 13 or unlocked within the various realms you visit. And what's interesting here is if your chosen archetype isn't working out for you or you're eager to experiment with new playstyles, you can seamlessly swap out one or both of your archetypes for an entirely new setup. Granted, you will have to invest time into leveling up these new classes, but due to the game's constantly replayable design, grinding isn't the snooze fest it so often becomes. Now at this point I want to talk about other aspects of Remnant's gameplay, more specifically puzzles. Now it's safe to say puzzles are nothing new to gaming, but here they've been cranked up. A lot. Whether it be fixing a music box or changing the position of shadows, these definitely aren't your average shoot a light to open a door video game puzzles. They take a fair amount of working out and can actually be pretty difficult to solve. The Lament, for example, is a dungeon that randomly spawns in Yaesha and is entirely composed of puzzles, and while they can be a giant pain in the arse to do, the reward is more than worth it. Now admittedly I'm not a big puzzle person and was more than happy to look up a guide, but if this is your thing then you'll thoroughly enjoy this part of the game. So the bosses, just like the gameplay, are an absolute blast, and I had a great time fighting more or less all the bosses I encountered. Granted, some can be a bit annoying, and I'm yet to beat the final boss, but overall the quality is very consistent, at least from the bosses I fought anyway. Now, what I like here is while the game does have more conventional fights, and don't get me wrong, they're still great, a lot of them have mechanics to keep you on your toes besides the boss itself. For example, jumping from platform to avoid attacks, not being able to look at the boss directly, or having to kill something slowly to avoid too many enemies spawning at once. There's even one of the best gimmick bosses I've ever seen in the form of the Labyrinth Sentinel, a maze full of giant moving cubes where every hit is an insta-kill. As such, you have to destroy parts of the stone to stop them crushing you, allowing you to move through the maze and deplete the boss's health. Now, something I will say about these fights is while undeniably fun, if you want to get the most out of them, you're really going to want to up the difficulty after your initial playthrough. Don't get me wrong, they still provide a decent enough challenge to be enjoyable, but outside of a few select bosses, it never took me more than a few attempts. Okay, so admittedly this game does have a few notable issues, with the main one being performance. At points the game felt a bit laggy and I'm fairly sure it wasn't just my computer, since I saw multiple people online complaining about the same problems, even on high-end PCs. On top of that, I did see a few glitches, for example when a boss bugged out and got stuck in a hole, or when I no-clipped through an elevator. And finally, I couldn't help but think that some of the hidden weapons are a bit too hidden. Like, don't get me wrong, I like hunting for special items as much as the next person, but I think some of them here are a bit too out there. Now, in my case, I don't particularly mind getting help from a guide. However, if you're the type of person that likes to discover everything on their own, then you might struggle with certain items. Although, I want to make it clear that none of the issues I've mentioned in any way ruined my experience or made the game unplayable. It was still an absolute blast. So overall, Remnant 2 is a fantastic game and I cannot recommend it enough. If you're a fan of the Souls games or shooters in general, then this really is a must-buy. Between its constantly shifting nature and ability to swap out classes on the fly, it has so much replayability. Like, I've played nearly 30 hours, and I've seen maybe 20% of what this game has to offer. I can't wait to reroll my campaign on a higher difficulty, to see the bosses, weapons, quests, and everything else I'm yet to discover, so yeah, long story short, buy this game, it's so good.